philosophy before. That sucks. Um, but yeah, that was kind of her solution to have this like advising body. Now maybe that won't work. That's kind of like a weak solution. I think Facebook should just go bankrupt, but that would be very hard to achieve. So in the meantime, the sort of pragmatic thing to do is like, yeah, impose these restrictions, like still keep them around, but impose these like restrictions.
What kind of restrictions would you specifically mean?
Restrictions on what Facebook employees can do, and restrictions on what Mark Zuckerberg can do, what decisions he can make to psychologically harm people or to cause their deaths indirectly, like those kind of restrictions. The restrictions on the profit-making capacity on Facebook when killing people directly leads to profit.
So, as far as I can tell, are you familiar with Twitch?
Yeah.
Yeah, so as far as I can tell, it's not about the program. It does seem to me that it's, even though everything you just said was correct, what I would say that it goes even farther, though, it does show you what humans do, and it's not exactly the program's fault that it comes out like this. What we really got to do is work on communication skills and the ability to talk to people with alternate opinions.
Well, but I think
and that's kind of the main thing.
Mixing up things because there might be two distinct problems, and you're talking as if
that's what I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
I was saying that it's not just what you said, although it is what you just said. It's just, to me, it also seems like we're so afraid to talk to each other about things that we never get to a place where we can all like kind of universally agree, or at least on a more grander scale than we tend to. We run away from conversations that are really important, and we gravitate towards conversations that really just aren't that important but are convenient for the moment, so you don't have to give anything deeper. You know?
Have you guys been called by like a no caller ID? This is the first time ever being called by a no caller ID.
Yeah, it's weird.
I've been called by one before.
I've been getting like 40 recently.
So it might be different from the US.
Yeah, in the past month, I think I've gotten like 15.
15?
Yeah, dude, I get a lot. Yeah, I don't know why it is, or how they get away with it, but...
Yeah, I just got one. I think, like, the person I was talking to, like, I don't even know. I think they, you see, I should never give people my phone number. I swear to God.
You really shouldn't, though.
Don't do that.
Should be really, like, tentative before you do.
Trust me, like, I know the risks of doing it, but this person I trusted, and, like, they were actually, like, someone that I knew very well, and, like, I think they're the ones that did it. I don't give my phone number away to, like, retards, so, like, I just,
let's not use the R word. That's
I had a feeling that you're gonna say the.
Hey, my friend. Oh, are you? Did he just leave?
Yeah.
Would you like to talk about? Well, I don't know. What would you like to talk about?
Oh, I was just gonna say I'm a socialist, so I think that all the problems that you're listing that are like human nature are really just problems of capitalism, and that there's not really a salient biological analysis that you can like point to say like X is human nature, because an experiment to show that it's caused by biological fact would need a control for social variables, right? So it would be like you maintain the biology the same and you change the social variables, but you can't do that, right? You'd need like a computer simulation to do that. So analyzing causation in biology and the social sciences is a very difficult topic. I think it can sort of be done, but it just comes down to the fact that you don't like look in the human body, look at a gene and like equate that with some contemporary social behavior. Especially if you're trying to give an evolutionary story of the origin of that behavior. I mean, you could point to very broad conditions, right? Like, just like we can point to very broad conditions of why humans eat and poop and make friends and have sex, and all of these things very broadly are true. But what I don't believe is why, like that, we can supply an evolutionary explanation to, why this specific person had sex with this specific person. Maybe like some evolutionary biologists tend to sort of overstate their theories and supply.
Well, I would push back here.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I would probably push back here because I would say that it is absolutely fair to say that. As obviously I'm talking about like it's part of the issue, not the entire thing. But I would definitely say that it's part of it. And thinking about things like the way that birds do mating dances and how it's very, very specific to behavior and as much as it's specific to visual stimulus. Their behavior is actually one of the main reasons that a bird will decide that, yes, I do want to mate with this partner. Correct?
Right.
So I'm just saying that it wouldn't be shocking if humans also have behaved in the same way. That behavior does matter in the evolutionary process. There are things that humans naturally gravitate towards more than other things. There's a more attractive way to move throughout life, and there's a less attractive way to move throughout life. I think that is definitely evolutionary.
The disanalogy here, and by the way, equating attractive and less attractive as like a normative thing.
No, it would be subjective. It would be subjective.
That's
subjective.
Pardon?
It would be subjective to the individual's experience, of course.
Yeah, of course, because otherwise that'd be the naturalist.
I'm just saying that.
But what I was going to say
before, the subjective part is that each person experiences it, but the objective part would be some people experience. There are things that are experienced by more people more often than others. Than other times. So like sometimes most of the time, there's tendencies for what behaviors are popular.
The Islot divide. Right. So the
Islot divide
claim is that the philosophy 101 here.
What was it?
Sort of divided sentences into two categories. Of course, there's more than two types of sentences, but here's the two we're interested in: descriptive sentences, like there is an evolutionary process, let's say, and prescriptive questions. This evolutionary process should, be upheld or is good. So it's a matter of, and like Hume, thought that, okay, well, it seems like you can't really fully determine the ought questions, what ought to be the case, what morally should be, just by looking at the is questions. Of course, some of the is questions are going to be relevant, whether I think it's good or not to shoot you with a gun is going to depend on my factual knowledge, but I actually know a gun can kill people. If you had an alien, for example, that didn't know shit about guns, they're not going to be able to make the correct moral decision because they don't know the correct descriptive facts.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm a little bit confused because I think you were pointing out a fallacy, and I'm kind of lost at what the fallacy was and what it meant.
Well, it seems to me that you were saying that the subjective aspect you're referring to was just the fact that descriptively humans subjectively experience it. Not that subjectivity leads to the prescriptivity of morality.
Yeah, I was more just assuming that we were operating on like a stance of each party was like a computer, with like a free-thinking individual making decisions kind of thing. Like I was just assuming that each actor. But like that was just kind of what I was assuming that so everyone's an individual, everyone makes free will choices, and that was really what I was talking about. Even animals make their own free will to a certain extent choices. To how predictable that is really different depending on the creature.
I don't really see how the free will debate will kick into play. Like I can imagine how you can intersect it, but I think the topic can be neutral to getting into a free will debate because I am a bit of a skeptic or compatibilist about free will, so I'm not sure how that's going to interfere.
Well,
but I will at least say that humans and organisms have the illusion of free will, and that's good enough for me. So
yeah, I agree.
I'll just be
I agree as a
question.
Well, I mean, it's actually extremely important to have it doesn't seem like society really knows what to do with that topic, which is really, really interesting, don't you think? That like
I think that society does know.
Well, if you would let me, I'm sorry. It's just like oh dog, please.
There's a squeaky toy in the back.
Yeah. Like, please.
Is that your dog or something?
Yeah, she's lovely. God, fuck, what was I talking about? What was I saying? Fuck. Too much weed tonight.
No idea.
There we go. Okay.
Yes, the best activity to do before entering an online form.
It's honestly, brother, you'd be shocked. You'd be shocked how good it is to get high and think about philosophy. On like as evidence-based as you can be. It's really helpful, honestly. It's surprisingly
it's
helpful.
It's probably better than alcohol.
It is definitely better than alcohol, and it's kind of like a shock that people try to equate the two. You know, not that people try to equate the two, but people say that they're exactly the same because they're really not.
They are very different drugs.
Yeah. What were we talking about? I'm sorry, I got lost.
I was just gonna gesture towards a broad point here that in the analyzing the behavior of birds is quite different to analyzing the behavior of humans. Humans are capable of a lot of things and, subjectively feel a lot of things that birds don't. Now, that's not to say that birds are, like, somehow worse or less complicated or anything like that. That's just to say that we're different from birds. So, inevitably, the scientific theories that apply to birds in terms of explaining their behavior may not apply to humans.
Correct. Agreed. It's not that I was saying that it would be a one-to-one thing, but if your point is that evolutionarily there's no reason to suggest that humans don't also, might not also... There's already, like, evidence to suggest that evolutionarily along the chain, these sort of things happen. You know? Like, in the same way that, like...
My point is that there's different scopes of analysis when it comes to behavior. There's different why questions we can ask. So we can ask the why question of, like, why does a human eat? Or why does a human engage in sexual intercourse? Or why does a human make friends in the first place? Like,
all three could be consideed from the same thing.
Questions. But what we can't answer, I think, by evolution is, like, why are some women attracted to men who are, like, muscular and tough and all of this? Or why are some people predisposed to be into philosophy instead of American football? All of these questions are questions that people want to form objective opinions about.
Mm-hmm.
And so people go to evolutionary psychology to basically reinforce what they're feeling social pressure to explain, right?
But that's the thing. That's that urge is not a problem as long as the individual going forward has a good way to establish what's true and what's false, and what attitudes are from everyone else's and what attitudes are their own. And that's like how you stimulate the individual within oneself.
It's clear that it's a problem because you just get evolutionary psychologists coming in with whatever political or social opinions they have because they experienced a shitty life or whatever,
right.
And they decide to air their grievances by making an evolutionary theory to explain something that's very particular to their life.
What would be the alternative? You have to present a theory.
Have some biases that affect their explanations. I'm not saying
theorizing is like the core of what science. Well, theory is like the core of what scientific discovery is, so I don't know how you could make that better than what it already is. How would you change the process so theory itself wouldn't be biased?
You're right that there's always going to be the attitude researcher coming into play, but there's some very specific things or very specific amendments to evolutionary psychology that you could prescribe. First of all, though, there's a... let me just read from the SCP article on this, right? It's in section 4 here of this webpage. Many philosophers who have criticized evolutionary psychology. Most of these critics are philosophers of biology, who argue that the research tradition suffers from an overly zealous form of adaptationism. Adaptationism, by the way, refers to a family of views about the importance of natural selection in evolution of organisms. So in other words, that they think the field is overly biased to these sort of natural selection explanations. And an untenable reductionism. Reductionism just means reducing some conscious set of mental states to some physical states. A bad empirical bet about modules, a fast and loose conception of fitness, and most of the above and more. All of these philosophers share one version or another of Buller's view. I am unabashedly enthusiastic about efforts to apply evolutionary theory to human psychology. But if philosophers of biology are not skeptical of the fundamental idea behind the project, what are they so critical of? What is at stake? Differing views about how to best characterize evolution, and hence how to generate evolutionary hypotheses and how to test evolutionary hypotheses. For evolutionary psychologists, the most interesting contribution that evolutionary theory makes is the explanation of apparent design in nature, or the explanation of production of complex organs by appeal to natural selection. Evolutionary psychologists generate hypotheses by first finding apparent design in the world, say in our psychological makeup, then presenting a selective scenario that would have led to the production of a trait that exhibits the apparent design. The hypotheses evolutionary psychologists generate, given that they are usually hypotheses about our psychological capacities, are tested by the standard psychological methods. Philosophers of biology challenge evolutionary psychologists on both of these points. And there's a big in-depth explanation here. But this is basically the consensus in the field, right? There's a bunch of evolutionary psychologists, philosophers of biology look at the broad sort of conceptual and methodological points behind biology and evolutionary psychology, and they're not necessarily opposed to the overall project of evolutionary psychology. But what they see is these various methodological weaknesses how to test the thing, weaknesses in terms of just finding some idea in our natural lives and then just like giving it a sort of ad hoc evolutionary explanation just to justify that. And they say, okay, let's be a little bit more careful here. Let's design this experiment more carefully.
Okay.
Let's not copy-paste our views about today onto, our ancestors. Hi, raining outside.
So,
we're talking about evolutionary psychology.
Yeah, I was wondering
Particularly.
what studies are coming out that are disproving the old models.
Sorry?
What studies, because you were saying that we shouldn't necessarily trust the standard model when it comes to evolutionary theory because is that what you were saying? Because of the studies that are coming out now?
There actually is no standard model in evolution. Word standard model.
Unfortunately there is.
Is there?
Yeah, there is. I can't remember, but it's called the standard model, isn't it? Let me look it up right now. Standard evolutionary.
Is it called the standard social science model?
I can't remember, dude. I think it was on a Kyrgyzstan video that I watched.
YouTube videos aren't the best source of academic explanations. I hate to break it to you.
Brother, do you know the differences in quality between YouTube videos? Do you know the difference in why you would trust one thing over something else?
I know there's some really good YouTube videos. I'm just having a bit of a jab. Don't take me serious. Don't take me that seriously. I was just having a jab.
Okay. I mean, it was kind of at my expense, kind of saying that somehow getting any information from YouTube is somehow negative, right?
No, it's just that if I do a search on the standard social science model, it's clear that this thing doesn't have that much consensus, right? It doesn't have the level of consensus that the standard model does.
Okay.
And it's also, if you look, I mean, if this is what you're talking about,
you're talking about just the story of evolution, about how a single cell organism is created, then how that single cell organism gets more complicated and then becomes a multicellular organism, and then branches off into many different species of different things, right?
Sorry, that's not what we're talking about.
The standard evolutionary model.
Evolutionary psychology, not standard model of evolution.
Okay, so how the brain developed the way it is.
So there is absolutely a standard model of evolution. I agree with that.
Right, but I mean, if you looked at so you're saying from when the human brain became more complicated than an ape's, is what you're saying. There's no standard model for how we got from that point to where we are today.
No, there's not.
So yeah, so you're saying that there's a bit
explaining it.
There, I know this sounds, but this is. I think we agree now. So from that point to this point, you're saying that because we don't understand how the human brain developed, it very well could be that none of it is based in biology and all of it is based in how society behaves.
Hello there.
Hey.
Okay.
We're
Is that what you're
just
saying? You're saying
talking
it's
about evolution.
you're saying it's based a lot less in the biological realities and a lot more in just the social choices from that point on.
Aren't they both kind of that work together?
Is that what you're saying?
In effect? Like,
Sorry, what were you saying, Grimsty?
no, I was just saying, like, I'm trying to get the names right. Okay, so no. I'm just like, I gotta be honest, I was just watching, like, a YouTube live stream, right? And this guy was doing, like, a philosophical debate thing with his Discord server, and I joined it and needed to verify my phone number, and I was like, nope. So I got mad, and then I just joined a random philosophy Discord server. I'm here now.
Fun.
And it seems like you guys are, I don't know what the broader, like, question was, but it just seems like he is like skeptical of, like, you know, how, like, obviously a single cell organism even evolved to the point of the human who's just fully sentient.
So we're talking about evolutionary psychology.
Psychology,
And this
yeah.
originated because Mild Cheddar said that it was kind of human nature to have various forms of conflict and suffering arising out of social media. To which
Yeah.
I said, it's not human nature, it's capitalism.
It's human nature too, is what I'm saying. I agree with you. It is socialism, or it is a lot of things, but it's human nature is
Right.
one of the probably the driver of all of these things. Basic philosophy, meaning like how humans interact. It seems to be that's what's causing all of the conflict because it only exists in the first place because of all the conflict between humans.
Raining outside, you've been awfully quiet. What's your thoughts on human nature and evolutionary psychology?
I think evolutionary psychology is a fantasy. It's like made up, basically.
See, he's more skeptical than I am, even. See, my position is that I think at least some explanations from evolutionary psychology might be applicable.
Yeah,
Maybe,
that's what I'm
let's
saying.
say-
That's all I'm saying.
I'd be even more pessimistic than that, where I don't think evolution can even. I don't think evolutionary theory can actually create real laws. Like, if you have a fish, like,
Right.
because to have a law, what it means to have, like, a law would be that you know that something determines this other thing, and this other thing is a product of that determination. And
Yeah.
so, like, to even have a fish, it's like, oh, you've got to have water. And then it's like, well, jellyfish come up in the water. Like, everything in the water comes up in the water. Like, water doesn't just lead to fish, right? And there's literally no...
Sorry, to interject here, Kainikos, a lot of people make these claims. They're called Humeans, right? Humeanism about laws is the sort of field here. Would you say that's right, Raining, or maybe it's just a correlation of views here?
On laws. My point would be that you cannot attribute some specific law as the cause of an organism. It's impossible, because an organism is literally the totality of all of its conditions. So it literally involves the entire Earth in its own constitution. Here's the thing, though. It isn't just the entire Earth. It is itself. Like, otherwise you'd be saying the organism is the air, or you'd be saying the organism is the water. Like, it doesn't even make sense. So an organism, by the very nature of being an organism, is self-making. It's a reproduction of itself out of and in relation to its environment, which it appropriates to itself. But it's not reducible to just this in the environment. So you literally can't create laws around an organism.
I disagree. Have you heard of Stephen Wolfram?
Yes.
Stephen Wolfram, the creator of Wolfram Alpha and Wolfram Research.
Yeah, he's doing physics.
He has a very interesting paper. Not sure if it's titled The Theory of Everything, but he's certainly, that's what it is, at least from his perspective. He sells it as the theory of everything, and it's the emergent properties of the universe derived from simple rules. And these are mathematical rules, not necessarily laws or observations. They are very, very simple rules, like vector points on a plane and their relationship between each other and how they link. And it's rules that define those relationships that you can use to simulate emergent properties in the universe.
Okay,
How do you
so
recommend you look
In order to be an emergent property, or to be emergent, it would have to suspend, absorb, and reconcile the initial rule to itself. So the initial rule is not a determiner of the emergent thing. The emergent thing is actually the truth of the rule. The rule is like suspended by the thing. So you can like start with like simple like basic law of world or something like that.
Do you know the
And
game?
then get an emergent thing out of it. It'd be that the law itself would have to undo its own intrinsicness. It would no longer be the law of that
Sorry,
thing.
just
It would be the law of it.
raining outside and interject here for a second. I have to note that this is strictly a different conversation topic than the one we're on before, because I don't think the lawfulness of the question of whether there is some scientific law that can describe a process throughout time, like the emergence of human consciousness or like the evolution of life. That's a strictly separate question than, you know, how legit are evolutionary psychology explanations. So these are just two different topics. And I don't think an answer towards one necessitates
There's a
an
link
answer
between the
towards
two,
another.
and that's what I'm highlighting.
Well, there's a link between the two, but I think you can, like evolutionary psychology, you can be yes or no about it, whether or not you agree with Raining. So, for example, I could take your perspective that there is some such equation or some such complicated scientific model that explains the emergence of human consciousness, right? But like me and Cheddar were saying before, once you get that emergence of human consciousness, what are the laws that describe, or are there laws that describe human consciousness itself? You might think no. So these answers don't necessarily fall hand in hand with one another. You could diverge at a certain point once you get on the table. Okay, I think there's a law that describes the emergence.
We're the product of many divergency. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Is that the right word?
Yeah, I think you're good.
Divergencies?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we didn't emerge until very late.
You mean consciousness, or do you mean humans?
Just as we are at the moment. Our
Yeah,
current
biologically,
state.
or our mental state?
Just.
Oh, I guess
state,
at the same time.
everything.
Yeah.
Our existence, our matter, our position in the universe.
Right.
Where it is we grew up, everything.
Mhm.
Just our state as we are. Imagine the saved data of humanity. Like, it had to emerge from something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that because it's emerged from something much later than the initial condition that created emergence, that those aren't linked, because they are.
Right.
Because
So
it's like a one-way operation. You know, if you can
you don't go back.
mathematically verify from any point in time that the origin stands true, but you can't necessarily do the operation in the other way. So you start from the origin and then you work to the end, and you can't necessarily prove that
Right.
that emerged from that. Actually,
well, the problem
you can in both ways.
Even though we can't
there's a kind of
prove...
elephant in the room here we haven't clarified, which is like, from my point of view, I don't know whether you actually are talking about the emergence of human consciousness, or if you're just talking about the emergence of humans biologically and behaviorally, because we can certainly tell a pretty like accurate scientific story about how physically, from a sort of physical description perspective, humans as these biological lumps of matter came into being and came to operate with a behavior, you know, that we, not the exact behavior as I was arguing, but came to, you know, come into existence in evolution and all this. What we can't really explain is how the inner subjective experiences of humans and of other organisms that preceded humans that did have some conscious perspective, how that came into existence, right? That's what's known as the hard problem of consciousness in philosophy. So that has many, you know, sorts of theories proposed.
Have you done anything to alter your consciousness?
That's a little bit of a subject change,
of the universe and the beginning of time when an organism first had a conscious thought. And did you have a video camera that captured their inner conscious thought?
What a dumb question. Of course not. What I'm asking you is, have you ever sought to alter your consciousness?
Yes, I've had alcohol, I've had coffee, I've had other medicinal drugs, I've had drugs.
No. I'm talking about a psychedelic.
Yes.
Okay.
Well-
but then you should have said psychedelic because other drugs can also alter your consciousness in some way.
Well,
They
I
don't-
think he was
they're not-
inferring
they don't
psychedelics,
affect
but it could be
consciousness that way.
anything. So,
They
not
need
just
to be. They need to be a psychedelic of some description to alter consciousness.
I actually
Caffeine
disagree
is
on
not-
that.
It's not.
I
It's not
personally
conscious
would-
altering.
I disagree with
I
that.
personally would only disagree. I just mostly think that consciousness is like the collectivity of all five senses, and a drug obviously is gonna alter one of those five senses, and I would say just simply, I would think that's altering consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
anything that alters
psychologists
consciousness.
psychologists
Okay,
and
that's fine.
psychiatrists use the word consciousness in a different way than philosophers. So when some philosophers use the word consciousness, they're talking about what's the minimal, like what it's like state that you're feeling and perceiving from a perspective. When psychologists use the word consciousness, they're talking about the type of conscious experience, and they classify it on this like state of consciousnesses, and so that's when you can talk about altering consciousness, right? From the
I'm talking about
philosophical
psychedelics.
definition of right.
That's
So
it.
from the
Sorry, mate.
philosophical definition of consciousness, you can't actually, alter the presence of consciousness because it's either there or it isn't. Sort of like an on
No,
or
but-
switch.
You can alter your access to it.
Only if
Sure,
you're
you can
aware
al-
of it.
You can alter the content. You can alter the content of experience. Yeah.
Only if you're aware of it, though. I mean, you'd have to know of the effects to want those effects, correct?
So, but Mike,
You'd have to
I
be
don't
able to.
think so.
Just being conscious doesn't mean you know why you're existing the way you are. So most of the animal kingdom doesn't know why it exists the way it is. But every once in a while, you get a mammal that understands that if it eats the fermented fruit, it gets drunk. But that's like really specific to that level of
I mean,
consciousness.
you can experience psychedelic effects without knowing that would happen. You can accidentally do that. I think,
As an
like,
animal, you
I don't
could,
know if
especially.
dolphins do this. Like dolphins get high off pufferfish. Like they just like pass pufferfish around and inhale something from it, and then that makes them like feel funny and drunk or whatever. I'm not a marine biologist, so I don't know the details, but something like
Yeah,
that.
lots
happens.
of species
Oh, okay.
seek to alter their consciousness. Lots.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And
interesting.
apes, especially for a long time.
It's interesting.
Is that like the whole Stone Dave theory or whatever?
I love that theory. It's so
Yeah,
good.
kinda.
It's probably true too if you think about it.
Probably
Yeah,
is.
Salmon, we were talking about evolutionary psychology before, and now we've shifted to the hard problem of consciousness, maybe. So I guess my question was, Drac, how does how does this idea of altering your consciousness with psychedelics relate to how consciousness formed in the first place? How are those two things related? Because I'm not seeing it.
How are they related? Well, I know that psychedelics have the effect of activating parts of the brain that don't usually see activation on a day-to-day basis. Or at least not in the order or in the connections that they create
Sure.
under the effect. And so you can typically access ideas and thoughts that would be kind of locked off to you otherwise. I mean, I know from my experiences with psychedelics that they're profoundly introspective.
Yeah,
They
I agree
delete,
with all
they
that.
delete the ego and allow
Yeah,
you to
ego
think
definitely
about
helps.
what's valuable and what's important. And
That's an interesting point, actually. Just as a side note, this doesn't connect with your main point of how psychedelics might explain the heart problem, but psychedelics do show an interesting property of consciousness, which is that you can have consciousness with a sort of atypical sense of self, right? So the sense of self that someone usually have of being connected through space and time and sort of in
So,
this way,
I
when
think I can
people
see where you're
experience
leading
ego
with
death.
that, and I think it's because psychedelics.
Well, where am I leading with it? Because I was just going to say that.
Because psychedelics alter the sense of self by connecting regions of the brain that aren't usually connected. Let's theorize the effect in a mammal of some description that we would not necessarily consider sentient, or not a mammal, but maybe an organism that we wouldn't consider sentient. Maybe cellular
Such
life.
as-
Cellular life. Maybe a jellyfish is a good example. Let's say, for example, a jellyfish is affected by a psychedelic for some reason. I don't know. Maybe it brushed by a pufferfish. And then that
Okay, but-
it altered
Right.
its neurochemistry to the point where it was able to make connections and realizations that it couldn't before, and so
Right, but
it alters
you
its
still have the hard
perception of
problem.
itself.
So
Or-
the problem is you still have the hard problem of consciousness with this. The question would just shift back to why did the psychedelic drugs have that consciousness-inducing capacity? What
If-
about those psychedelic drugs?
If you alter the perception of the self repeatedly for long enough over a large enough set of different species, eventually you will get a type of sense of self that understands that it exists.
Right. Yeah.
And so maybe that neurochemistry then, once it's been developed with the what's the word I'm looking for? Neurogenesis, that psychedelics create. They allow you to develop new pathways. And
The problem with this theory is that you need to gain evidence that an array of creatures received access to psychedelics, and I'm not sure if that's possible.
Yeah, you can only get it by word of mouth,
not at this
unfortunately.
point.
Yeah, you're correct, but it's
I think
it's colloquial
the
because we
Stoned
know
Ape
how.
theory usually the Stoned Ape theory usually is used to explain why humans have the specific sort of consciousness and the specific sort of creativity that
Yeah.
we did. So that's what the whole Stoned Ape theory
Right.
thing usually explains.
I heard
But in
the
terms of explaining the hard problem of consciousness, that is explaining
It's-
how this conscious perspective emerged from a non-physical, non-perspectival point.
I don't think it's difficult to see
Argue
how
that.
the effects of psychedelics on apes transitioned them into humans. I don't see how it's difficult to say that that could work for lots of other types of organisms, and that it could have happened to the organisms before the apes that then became the apes. Like, I think it probably works for everything. It's just a natural. It's a natural.
I mean, sure, but you just
It's a natural
need,
variable in evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology as well.
I mean,
It's
it's kind of it seems kind of a reach though to say that the psychedelics just
If it's
create.
if it's a variable in the development of humans, it can be a variable in the development of any organism.
Okay, but you don't have.
I would agree with
access
that,
to
100%.
Whether it's the origin point of consciousness, you
Okay.
only have access to that it affects consciousness. I think no one has a problem with saying that psychedelics affect consciousness. I think the problem is how do you
Where's
get
the origin?
conscious perspective
Yeah.
overall. I don't think the origin is people taking psychedelics, because then the burden of explanation just gets pushed back one blow, and the explanation is now, okay, so what is it about psychedelics that does create this conscious perspective? You still have this gap between the physical and the conscious that you need to explain.
It could easily just be
so
like.
I would.
Well,
Yeah.
it could be in part due to like the human capacity and the human desire to expand our minds and understand things. So that feeds into taking
Hang on,
psychedelics,
that
which
requires a
affect you
conscious
to
perspective,
have that
which is the very thing
result.
we're trying to explain.
Yeah, I see where you're getting to. It's like, how did this bootstrap?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
currently we can make all sorts of assertions from our perspective about what the origin was like, but we can't say for sure.
Right.
At least we don't know how to say for sure.
Unfortunately, it's
This is
true.
Making you believe in like the fact that like psychedelics even expanded, or like I guess even gave humans like our special sort of like conscious even more. And like I mean I kind of actually agree with Druck, or I don't know really know how to say your name right.
Yeah, Druck is fine.
Because like what psychedelics actually even do in your brain is they use the most like outer layer, right, which is like your cerebral cortex. And that's where like most like thoughts and reasoning is, you know. It's not like the part of your body that the part of your brain that, you know, controls movement and like everything like non-sentient or
Hey,
you
what's
know,
up, Hera?
what's the word not autonomous but like
It's kind of like a temporary form of synesthesia where the senses blend together, and there are connections between your perception of the senses in the brain. You know, that's why like people experience music, they can see colors. Some people see numbers as colors. That's you know, I think it creates a temporary form of synesthesia.
Well, that's just like synchronicity, right? Like Jung and stuff?
I don't know.
Where it's kind of like music. I don't know. A pattern repeats itself. I don't know, man. I'm just a stoner. I don't even know why I'm here.
Same here.
So if psychedelics or drugs with psychedelic effects truly create consciousness or can explain its origin, why don't we see people taking psychedelics develop another consciousness perspective inside them?
They typically do.
I would say that they do. Like the elephants with the
It's
fermented
not a separate
gourd
one.
and things
It's
like
just they have more access to the one they already had.
Right.
Okay, so why isn't it a separate one, bro?
Because humans
Because a
got...
separate one formed out of nothing from the original point where someone didn't have a conscious perspective and then someone gained a conscious perspective. So there's all sort of paradoxes like this I could put to your theory. But let me propose an alternative theory of why human consciousness is so special, right? Because there's a couple of different pit stops here. There's a pit stop of, the hard problem. How do we get from non-conscious to conscious? Let's leave that alone for now. Let's just concentrate on the question of, why is human consciousness special? Since that's what motivates your stoned ape theory in the first place that you then apply to all other organisms. So
it was more of a side thought that is interesting, I'd say.
Then I can levy skepticism towards the other views. So my alternative theory is this: the very unique form of consciousness we see in humans is in part, not completely, because we did evolve from other animals, and I take it these other animals share aspects of our consciousness that lemon snail that we have, but the human way of socializing and the human existence in social groups and our activities is partially what's to explain for our creativity, our language usage, all of these abilities we have. Although I don't subscribe to a theory by which there's some sort of universal grammar like Chomsky or something, I would subscribe to the theory that humans had this sort of latent ability of the brain in order to use language, or it got affected as we came to invent and develop language.
Well, we know the gene. We know the gene that makes it possible. It could have been lying around.
Right.
Correct. That's a good point.
The gene, yeah, I agree with that. But the gene that makes it possible does not prescribe a universal grammar, and the gene that makes it possible could have just gone unused, right? So, like I was talking about the other day, let's say we have an evil dictator who enslaves the world and harvests the world for babies, and then isolates those babies from any language used in communities. Would those babies spontaneously come up with language without being taught? Probably not. Or would
it depends on what your time frame
babies
is.
Or a lot of mutations.
What's your time frame? You're saying is a baby that's given no instruction going to be anywhere close as to a baby that was given instruction?
No, all the babies aren't given any instruction.
Exactly, but compared to what? Compared to what?
You can have a...
Because of society, this happens faster, but that doesn't mean...
Sorry, Hera, what were you saying?
Sorry, yeah, you can have a genetically enabled emergence of language and stoned ape theory at the same time.
Right, you can have both, and I think it is both.
Psychedelics could trigger that mutation.
That is true.
I think it is both.
That is possible. But I think you can also construe them as competing theories. That is
well, they are competing. That's like
you're giving a little bit too much. Like, I'll give a little bit of leeway to psychedelics being being an explanation at some point to something. I'm just not going to want to commit to what that something is, and I would assign a sort of higher probability to the sort of language social theory rather than psychedelics.
There is actually one thing that would convince me of stoned ape theory. If we prove neurogenesis, because there's
what's neurogenesis?
That
just more brain activity.
That they literally
it's the growth of neurons in the brain.
New neurons.
More brain activity.
Well, it's not necessarily activity; it's new neurons.
Okay.
Which we thought was impossible for a while, but is now. There are some accounts now from reputable scientists that psychedelics stimulate neurogenesis, the creation of new neurons. If that's the case, then I don't know how conclusive the evidence is. But if it is, if we prove that, I think that's a point on the stoned ape theory.
That's actually a really wonderful thing to know and to understand and to have as a tool. I have grown my own mushrooms and produced my own microdoses. which
How's it
have a
going?
very wonderful effect.
What do you
making
use?
me very creative and childlike
What do you use?
when it comes to the interpretation of my surroundings.
It wouldn't be conclusive.
I'm sorry to cut you off,
Stone
but I was actually
theory.
wondering what
It
you
would be
use.
It would be supportive,
I'm not
but not
saying it's
conclusive.
conclusive.
It would be
It's-
compelling, but not conclusive. That's what I'm saying.
It's a testimony. It's my subjective experience.
No,
and-
if psychedelics actually trigger neurogenesis, it would be compelling evidence for Stone Ape theory.
It would be, and I think that
yeah, well, it does.
But Hera, would it be conclusive evidence for stoned organism theory? Where stoned organism theory is the generalization of stoned ape theory, but onto the set of all possible conscious organisms. That would be the claim that all possible conscious organisms only got consciousness because of their interaction with psychedelics.
No,
Well,
to me,
not
it sounds like
necessarily.
I don't think so. No.
They could have also produced their own psychedelics, which have altered their consciousness. So
produce their own psychedelics. What about produced consciousness? What about they evolved to have consciousness, but we don't use the word psychedelic?
Yeah, you could have an organism emerge,
Naturally.
have consciousness and language without ever. But then, what is a psychedelic? Is serotonin psychedelic, or is only only psilocybin?
That would seem to just like
It's a
stretch the word
neurotransmitter.
psychedelic really broadly. Now, maybe some people have a bias to feature psychedelics and psychological explanations about evolution because they have an emotional attachment to psychedelics, like they've improved their lives, or they have some business interest in psychedelics. So that's something to be wary of.
Ooh, I would not say that a
when
lot of
we're-
people have business interest in psychedelics. That is not true. Some people
I
would,
mean,
but
business
that's
interest
very
in
extremely
so far
rare.
promoting their book about psychedelics and their brand of psychedelic evangelism. That's
Yeah,
what I mean.
but I mean that's not just spreading the word on a passion that you have does not mean that somehow because they're profiting off of it means that they're
you can take a guess at someone's intention.
yeah.
Like, if anyone is exclaiming wonderful things about a particular thing, you could assume that at some level that they may be either personally or financially invested.
Right. You know
That's
how
a
like
possibility.
right. You know how like it's
But-
super easy to say why Ken Ham and his creationist museum is stupid. Like that's really easy to say exactly why these are all the reasons that doesn't make sense. But it's kind of hard to do that with the mushroom community because it does feel like they do put a lot of emphasis on their studies.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
real science
Yeah,
happening.
real good
and
stuff.
It's really not as bullshit as some people think it is.
Well,
I don't think it's bullshit at all. I just think that extrapolating the theory to the hard problem of consciousness is stretching it a bit far.
okay, so there's an account. I don't know if you guys
I'm
are already
not
talking
stretching
about this. There's a staggered account of the Stone Ape theory where small doses, imperceptible doses, actually improve visual acuity. And there was tests done in the 70s that if you take very little psilocybin, that you wouldn't even notice that you're actually buzzed. You do better on visual tests of pattern recognition, of edge detection, etc. And that's the first level. The second level is basically, what McKenna called more instances of successful copulation, because there's more excitation sexually, basically, and they're getting it on, the monkeys. And then the third level is language and visionary experiences and all that. So, and neurogenesis maybe is kind of tied up into the second and third, maybe the third exclusively. But I think the first two levels are important: the visual acuity and the sexual excitation, because those are actually evolutionary advantages. We're not clear if, we don't have to agree that consciousness or language are. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But in smaller doses, the visual acuity and the sexual excitation is an evolutionary advantage, which would strengthen the Stone Ape theory hypothesis.
Correct.
But
I agree.
But again, compelling, but not, if proven, compelling, but not conclusive evidence. And especially Ugu brought up Stone Ape theory versus stoned organism theory. Just because one type of organism, had consciousness emerge because of psychedelics, doesn't mean that every instance of consciousness, ever is caused or involved in psychedelics or
Agree.
somehow,
It
caught
does
up
seem
in
like
psychedelics,
humans that
yeah.
had a part,
Yeah.
like a part in the story, though. It seems like psychedelics have played a significant role in human evolution. We can't say that that's true for anything else, but we can say it seems like that's the truth for humans, at least. I'd say.
Well, but I don't think so. I don't know, Ugu. When you say the hard problem, you mean the qualia problem, not like the emergence of consciousness, right?
I'm just saying that it had an effect.
I'm talking about what David Chalmers and what the rest of the analytic philosophy of mind literature talk about when they say the hard problem.
Which is why there are qualia.
Why there are qualia? Yeah. Well,
Why
that
there's
has to do
qualia?
with the emergence as well. The emergence of it.
Well, I guess
By emergence, I don't mean in a philosophical sense. There might be a story that doesn't feature emergence whatsoever, right? So panpsychism is sort of non-emergentist variants of panpsychism. And,
okay, but it's not about how consciousness emerged. It's about why.
Right.
I guess I can see
they're
where
intertwined, bro. They're always discussed.
I feel like it would be really
genetic-
blind to look at other species of apes and say that they act a specific way that we can measure. It would be kind of weird to say that humans don't act like them at all. It would be kind of, I feel like, correct to say that humans in some way act like this. And here's some data that we can use to see how humans will act in the future. I don't know.
Yeah, but again,
By studying
like what
apes.
happens in evolutionary psychology, I guess to go back to that, is that a bunch of conservative white men have opinions about human behavior
But-
that they want to entrench as norms. Are really good of being a
Well,
powerful
here's what I'm
scientist
trying to
white
say.
man and entrenching your behavior as norms is by saying literally it's in your DNA. This is unchangeable. You have to act like that.
Well,
This
here's
is how racist views propagate. This is how
Right.
sexist and incel views propagate.
I'll interject.
It's just that simple.
I'll interject right here only in that I think you're absolutely correct, except for the fact that the more conservative style people, they lean a lot in the direction of God, which is gives them their reasons, and in that they're not really.
Necessarily.
Well, I'm
There's
just saying that
conservatives of all stripes.
you could eat.
It's not so black and white.
Take it from a guy whose family is entirely conservative and entirely Christian. They don't really think for themselves. They just kind of look for what their team says for them to say, and they just kind of do it. So what I'm saying is,
evolutionary psychology is slightly similar.
yeah, and what I'm saying is, when it comes to the anti-trans stuff, I would say that doesn't quite make sense in this case because the creationists don't care about evolution, and I keep trying to tell all of my conservative family about evolution and how this is actually the way to view the world, and they keep shutting me down and not wanting to talk to me about it, which is weird because I'm literally just talking about the beginnings of like humankind. So they're not really thinking very critically of it. It's not so much that they hate trans people, it's just that they're only picking the one answer that they know. Usually, unfortunately, this is actually the case, as far as I can tell.
Well, I mean, I don't think any of that description is enough to judge whether or not someone hates trans people. That's a complicated topic, and a lot of people are transphobic in some way. But I digress.
I would say a lot of people are, but I would say that the vast majority of people are not. That's what I would say.
Why can't there be qualia before there is consciousness? That would be my question.
What before consciousness?
Why can't there be qualia or experience before there is, I don't know, maybe consciousness is qualia for the analytic or for Chalmers.
Yeah, so this gets kind of technical. So I would say that consciousness used in the philosophy of mind sense, that is the minimal thing you need for the what it's like experience. You don't need a selfhood for that, or a perspective of a self. What I mean by a perspective of a self is like this object that's united through time, so it's continuing through time and is the bearer of some experiences. And you can say, distinguish between the subject and the world. That's what the self does. So you don't need selfhood to get consciousness. That's how we're going to use the word consciousness. So it follows if that we decide to use the word consciousness in this way, you can clearly get these, this bundle of experiences. Think of Hume's sort of bundle theory.
That's
Well,
that's what I was going to say. You can be a pan-experientialist.
I would say that if you exist, there's a way to not exist. going forward. Like, if you exist, you can do something that puts yourself in danger, that makes you no longer exist. You perish. Correct?
No, the point is that we're talking about such a primordial state of consciousness that there's not going to be a you.
Yeah, what I'm saying is my
experience.
basis for consciousness at that level of thinking would be if you understand what kills you and you understand what doesn't kill you. And that's basically what self-awareness, what I would break it down to. Because you avoid the things that hurt you and you go towards the things that will help you.
So here,
Sure,
I mean,
something like that.
we can go into the consciousness discussion, pivot. I mean, Drop is definitely is not. I don't know but I do want to say one last thing about Stone Ape theory connected to this, and then we can go on to like just talk consciousness, because that'd be really more exciting. So I don't think it's impossible for qualia to already have existed in the animal kingdom, and then for psychedelics to kind of have accelerated this serotonergic circuitry into a more sort of blown out language capability that gives you the symbolic relation of consciousness eventually. So qualia plus language and abstraction or symbol use with enough complexity has a sort of recursive symbolic relation, which is consciousness. I don't. And, anecdotally, psychedelic experiences really do kind of target the language centers, and there are all kinds of linguistic perception and phenomena. So this, to me, is plausible, but there isn't conclusive evidence. Like, it's a fun theory to throw around. I don't think there's enough evidence for it.
I would agree with you. It's fun to think about, though.
Conclusive evidence.
I agree with you.
Language
at
is
the end of the day.
definitely one of the things that is very difficult to get out when you're on a psychedelic. It's very difficult to communicate.
Interesting. That's a really interesting dichotomy. Where it's like you might have the most interesting thoughts, but you're never able to say anything about them.
But
Yeah.
on the other hand,
Very interesting. Okay.
This is exactly the mystic and Gnostic tension, because the mystic believes in a non-cognitive truth, and that non-cognitive truth, exposure to that thing which is beyond representation, is exactly what's going to stretch the limit of what's representable, right? Is exactly what's going to push your language and imagination to be able to communicate more.
Right.
More.
That's a good point.
At the end of the day,
To reiterate here, the point Hera's making is that if you are having these new exciting thoughts that aren't quite communicatable in the typical way, that's going to push your language and representational capacity to communicate, so that it's not like some of these things were completely uncommunicatable. It's just that you have to sort of innovate and push language to do so. And
Exactly.
So I guess that seems kind of plausible, but yeah, overall I'm fairly negative on this. Very speculative. I wouldn't jump to the Stoned Ape theory, I guess.
I love jumping to it just because it's fun to talk about.
No for me. Stoned Ape theory, fun, plausible.
Well, the stoned organism theory is actually way more interesting than the Stoned Ape theory. Like, I find the Stoned Ape theory a bit.
I have way more to add. So,
But like the
Well, a
stoned
stone
organism
plant would
theory
be just a
have
you first
regular
need to
plant.
consider what is a psychedelic. A psychedelic is a neurotransmitter. Right? It's exogenous, so we have to take it to get it into our systems for it to have an effect.
No. We have
No, we
DMT. We have DMT in our brain.
We have DMT
Besides
with
DMT,
it.
which doesn't get released very often at all. If, let's say, for example, all right, so if a psychedelic is really just the presence of a neurotransmitter, what if organisms develop their own neurotransmitters in order to change their consciousness over time?
What if? Can you repeat that? What if what?
What if organisms create their own neurotransmitters, and they evolve their own neurotransmitters over time in order to improve?
Well, we know this happens,
develop their
right?
consciousness.
We know this
This
happened.
happened at least with serotonin, right?
It happens. We can see it in humans. Like, yeah, we've got serotonin, and serotonin varies across the population in terms of the levels.
But we know what it
Well,
does.
everything with the nervous system has serotonin.
I think
So this happened, right? There was an organism that produced serotonin.
Hey, we have some questions from the chat the voice text chat. I'm not sure if you guys have been looking at that.
No.
Salmon says, "How the fuck could they be heritable? Can anyone explain?"
Inheritable?
No, how the fuck could they be heritable? That is, could the traits of consciousness and such that are created by psychedelics be heritable by other organisms?
I would imagine it's
offspring, etc.?
in a similar sense to, like, I don't know, a machine on an assembly line. Just each computer can do about the same thing. That's kind of what evolution is. Just like
no, you could actually make a
mind
stronger epigenetic argument that the behavior was successful and it was passed on. Eating these mushrooms gave you
Right.
Correct, yeah.
an evolutionary advantage, and it kept growing your brain with neurogenesis, and that was passed on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think people knew that it had this effect too, so they used
But
to.
the link, this is where the link to a genetically enabled evolution of language is actually relevant, because this actually is where, as Ugo said, they can be construed as competing accounts of the
So
emergence.
Salmon says evolutionary traits are inherited from inherited. So unless you admit that psychedelics affect genes, you can't really explain how they could be heritable.
No, the reaction to psychedelics is inheritable.
No, this is what I'm saying. Like, this is actually what Ugo was saying, that you can see them as competing accounts. Like, either the psychedelics triggered this gene that enables language, or they accelerated or brought it into use, and it was just lying around, and then you have to explain this
Good point.
coincidence.
Yeah.
Even if it does change genes, it doesn't appear to be changing them in a bad way.
Right, that's a good point.
So I don't know why anyone's concerned about them changing your genes. Like,
I think we're talking about whether it does or not.
Well, we're concerned about it because we're not discussing whether psychedelics for the average person are good or bad. That's just a separate topic. So I can see how it could influence your views on random
They're
philosophy
not
topics.
that great for the average person, but they are certainly fantastic for the below average people.
Okay, but all I'm saying is that you can see why such a politically or personally charged might motivate our thinking to assign higher credences to speculative hypotheses concerning psychedelics and the creation of consciousness.
Listen, man, when
There
you're
would be
talking
some-
psychedelics, it's always that. It's always going to be, questioning things and not knowing what's real or not.
Yeah.
If you ever talk to someone who's gone through psychedelics, the reason we're talking about it in the first place, then you see exactly what they're talking about. Or like why they would say that this stimulates the human mind, at least the human mind, and probably other creatures as well.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like it takes a specific personality to get benefits out of psychedelics, or to not get destroyed by them, basically.
Well, the self-reflection
or
is
have good
intense, and it's you'd probably be correct in saying that it's not for everyone. It's just the people who have gone through it do almost unanimously come back with stories of, wow, this actually helped me get my thoughts in order.
Right, but they need to curb their enthusiasm about how universalizable these benefits are.
Yeah,
Correct.
It's certainly not going to be universalizable schizophrenics.
Right, exactly.
And I have
It should be like weed then,
right
21
now.
and
I've
up.
been microdosing for months, right? Like I've
Ooh.
taken psychedelics since I was a teenager, but they're not for everyone. They're actually bad for some people. Like,
Okay.
Yes. I would not recommend anything other than a microdose for someone who is schizophrenic. I have schizophrenic friends, and I've given microdoses to them, and it's changed the nature of their experience in a positive way.
That's really good.
But that's going to be different for everyone.
Yeah.
Like I only felt safe giving him a microdose because it was so small.
Right.
But yeah, it can change the nature of the voices and the experience to
Interesting.
be more positive.
Ugo, have you like looked into like the whole predictive processing versus embodied cognition, or like the whole like information-based theories of consciousness field?
No, not really. I side towards account of
You said-
consciousness, which is just like really broad, and it's not gonna
Wait, you cut
tell you exactly
out.
why.
You cut out. You cite towards what?
Oh, psychofunctionalism.
Psychro?
Psychofunctionalism. So it'd be a functionalist
psychofunctionalism.
definition of mental. It'd be a functionalist definition of states, which is limited by some chemical like possibilities of what sort of biological materials can like produce consciousness. That's just to answer the problem of like the hard problem. That's not to say that this is gonna like fill in the blanks of like, okay, but why did those chemicals do what they did? I don't really know the error theory for that, I guess.
Are you familiar with Putnam's like positions? Because he had a few.
Not exactly. I mean, he did have a functionalist position at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I forget
Exactly.
if he went
At some
from
point.
analytic functionalism to psychofunctionalism.
I want to say he did, but it's been a while. He always confuses me.
I don't know. The original sort of functionalist theory just felt like a poorly thought out theory, but like maybe there are some people who these days who thinks you can have machines being conscious if they're complex enough, but that gets less into analytic functionalism and more into the complexity stuff, like you're saying.
What would you say is the difference between analytic functionalism and psychofunctionalism?
Well, one takes the functionalist, the functional states as a priori. The other takes them as only.
Could you say that again, please?
Okay, yeah. Let me explain what I mean. So, functionalism in philosophy of mind is a view analyzes mental states as.
You said a word there.
A priori.
A priori.
A priori. What is that?
Yes. Like before experience.
So I'll explain what functionalism is first, because that will make it more understandable.
Let's look it up.
So
I'm just gonna Google a priori.
Yes, please. So
Sure.
Google, please again. So analytic.
a functionalist mental state is sorry, let me say it like this. Functionalists define mental states as composed of the inputs, outputs, and relations to other mental states. So in terms of inputs, behavioral outputs, and the internal cognitive relation to other states. So what that means is that a physicalist definition of a conscious mental state is going to be one that talks about a specific set of physical properties. They're not necessarily going to include these environmental inputs, behavioral outputs, and the internal cognitive relations, although they might include the internal cognitive relations bit. So what that means is that functionalists could say account for this trait of multiple realizability. So a mental state is defined as one that is multiply realizable if the physical constitution of the mental state or the physical realizer of the mental state isn't necessary for that mental state. So for analogy, take a calculator, for instance. You can perform arithmetic on a calculator, on a piece of paper, on a whole bunch of things, right? So that sort of process is multiply realizable. Of course, we're not creating consciousness when we're doing a calculation, but the same idea applies, right? So if you have different kinds of brain stuff realizing the same mental state, this is the sort of thing that motivated functionalists to say, hey, maybe the physical components of the mental states aren't really that important. Maybe it's solely the behaviors and the patterns and all that. And so this came to a view that was called analytic functionalism. So analytic functionalists thought that the material mattered not at all. You could have consciousness potentially multiply realizable in any sort of physical material, whether or not it's for human stuff. You could make it out of silicon chips, you could make it out of spaghetti, you could make it out of anything, so long as the functional states, the functional specifications were the same. That is, so long as you had the behavior, you have the same sort of pattern of consciousness and these internal relations. And so the word that you would use to describe that is a priori. That is, that they thought this view was true prior to experience because you didn't need any empirical evidence about the world in order to actually say what is a conscious state and what's not, right? So that was the view of analytic functionalism.
Right. Well,
so real
I
quick,
got the definition of Google, and it actually made sense, as opposed to whatever that was for 5 minutes.
Before we move on to psychofunctionalism, is multiple realizability only possible with token identity, or can you have multiple realizability with type identity? Because I think that's one of the things. I think that's what got Putnam to change his mind. He wanted to keep multiple realizability, but I don't remember the details.
Damn, the stoned ape guy left after he said my definition wasn't as good as his Google dictionary definition. Damn.
Or a priori. I think he looked up a priori, not functionalism.
Yeah, I know. But like,
if he thought
in
you were
order to
explaining a priori, that's poor
I was
guy.
explaining both. I was explaining both what a priori meant and function meant. You can't understand
Nice.
functionalism as a priori without understanding functionalism and a priori. There's just a compositionality of language, bro. Anyway,
Okay, well, dude, I don't know if I told you, but I'm talking to this professor of math, and he's trying to help me with category theory, and I'm just always like,
oh my god.
and I'm just like busting his, like, pulling his chains all the time about what does it mean for something to not be compositional,
Right.
But
He's like, shut up and calculate.
no, he's really interested in the philosophy. Actually, I mean that's
good.
yeah, and that's kind of the fun part of it because I
Should
suck
go
at-
through,
It was a really
the,
interesting
category
conversation.
Theory for philosophy.
Yes, that's one of the texts I should go through. But I'm still I'm smooth brained when it comes to math. I need but like okay
I'm
how is
interested in the question still.
psychofunctionalism different from analytical functionalism?
Ned Block's paper, Troubles with Functionalism, or Problems with Functionalism, whatever it's called, goes through all of this, and that was taken to be like one of the definitive papers that sort of showed that analytic functionalism was at least like not a very good view, or challenging it. So the difference is that, well, at least Ned Block argued that with analytic functionalism would have to concede that if you got a nation of people to hold up cards of like cardboard that like represented different neurons and interactions in the brain perfectly, you would have to assign a group consciousness or a singular consciousness to the group, to that nation of people. So like the thing with analytic functionalism is that it claimed that
Exclusion.
any sort of representation could do the trick. So
Yeah.
as long as you have the right structure of representation, the metaphysical substance of representation didn't matter at all.
I see.
And that's just fucking stupid, kind of. Well,
So-
the only people who wouldn't think it was stupid maybe are people who are fans of AI stuff, right?
I mean, I
Wow.
wanted to bring that up, because it really doesn't matter for cognitive
the
scientists
problem-
who are doing predictive processing, they give no
Yeah.
fucks.
Yeah, the problem with the AI stuff for the would-be functionalists is that the would-be analytic functionalists is that like they don't fucking know what the representational states are, right? You have the whole like black box problem where you don't know, why your AI is doing what it's doing, and you're just sort of like, at the whims
what
of
are-
the algorithm you define.
Fair enough. And Chinese room, etc. So what are the entailments? What extra entailments does psychological or
What do you mean?
psychofunctionalism? Because psychofunctionalism is
Oh,
still
well,
a
it just says
functionalism.
it just. Oh, right. Yeah. So the extra like set of conditions is that the only functionalist states that can realize consciousness are some of a particular set of biological material. In other words, I just say I'm a psychofunctionalist in case we find out that other sorts of things are conscious, because
Fair
it
enough.
seems rather limiting to say that like only humans can produce consciousness, or only this sort of matter can produce consciousness. It might be a little bit more broad than that. So
Wait, so you're not an
You know.
eliminativist?
no, I don't think I'm a
fuck?
eliminativist.
Okay, so
Why
are
would I
you-
be an
Wait, so-
eliminativist?
But okay, so are you non-reductive about qualia?
This is a tough one. I'm reductive about qualia when it comes to ontology, but non-reductive when it comes to epistemology. What I mean by that
Wait,
is that I think it's possible that hypothetically we could have some such reduction, but I don't actually think humans will be able to achieve or know this reduction. Well, that just leads to the question, if humans aren't able to achieve Ornovis reduction, why just posit this hypothetical reduction? And at that point, I just throw my hands up and say, I don't know.
Wait, but
Hey, I have a question
read,
to interject. Can you real quick redefine qualia?
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to redefine qualia. I'm just a stoner, I don't know what I'm doing, thank you.
Just the internal state of, like, feeling or experiencing something, basically.
So self-awareness at its core, or what exactly would you define then? Self-awareness in relation to qualia?
Subjective experience.
Yeah, subjective experience.
Okay, so an individual experience, a self-aware individual experience, or any experience at all.
Self-aware. It
Okay.
doesn't need to be
Just
self-aware.
sensation.
Gotcha.
Just
Okay.
sensation,
Okay. Gotcha.
Perception, like you know,
I
like
don't-
salt.
I mean, it's super relevant as far as like
involved,
philosophy circles go, but like we know that happens already, right?
Well, no, not if you're an eliminativist or a reductionist. It doesn't happen. That's the whole point. That's what we're debating. But Ugu,
Well, I'm saying we know because like you have to be self-aware to talk about whether you're self-aware or not. So
No, sorry, mild cheddar. Get the word self-awareness out of your brain because
it's not necessary
qualia
for
has nothing
qualia.
to do with self-awareness.
Okay, then that's what I was asking. Where
It's just
I'm thinking about it like a
basic
self-awareness.
experience.
So qualia is just existence at all, without even being recognizing self. Is that correct?
Not
It's not
existence,
existence,
just
it's
feeling like
feeling.
something. Feeling like something, basically. Like what it feels like to
You have
taste.
existence without feeling. You just wouldn't.
Because
know
it just
about
it just
There'd
sounds
be no
super
self-
ironic because this does sound like the same concept of if a tree falls in the middle of the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? Because like
No,
No, that is a separate question called external world skepticism.
is that
Okay,
not the
but-
same thing we're thinking about now as far as like I mean
No, it's completely different. It's a separate
no,
area
we're,
of philosophy.
we're talking
called
about like
external
the ontological status of qualia.
Yeah.
Sure. So in that sense, it's kind of covered under the same umbrella, but only tangentially. Primarily,
Yeah,
we're discussing
only
sort of. Yeah. So okay. So how about I'm sorry if I'm kind of being interrogative, Ugu, but I really have to know
Yeah.
if you're. Have you read Bidao, like Weak Emergence? Because he makes the same sort of.
You talked about
the-
this the other day.
We did.
Yeah, you mentioned Badao or whatever. I thought you were talking about.
No, I mean in the context. So yeah, you would be weak. I don't know if you're a weak emergentist about it, because then you grant that there is an epistemic distinction or descriptive distinction or underivability, but without simulation, without like going through the calculation,
No,
epistemically.
I don't think
But
there's. I don't think there's a priori under.
okay. No, that's fair enough. It's just limitation. It's a limitation of our resources. Yeah, I get it.
And I wouldn't make a definitive claim. I'd just say like, I'm 90% sure that we're not going to be able to figure it out.
No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. But then they're not causally efficacious, right? Like there's no emergent property that is distinct. It's the same ontologically as the parts.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I mean, if you're reductionist about the ontology but not about the epistemology, then that has to be the case. They don't have any causal efficaciousness because they are the same as the parts ontologically.
Yeah, but it might just be the case that you way where we're talking about the parts and the what they realize is gonna be it's always gonna be more useful to talk in a dualism unless we're fitted with the sort of like illimited materialist like Churchland's wet dream of like being able to directly perceive, directly talk about mental states.
Or you can have non-reductive physicalism. Or
but non-reductive physicalism is confusing. Like, so I thought for 5 years
because
when
of
I was reading
overdetermination.
Well, no. It's more confusing than that. I thought non-reductive physicalism meant my position right now. Like, I thought that's what people were talking about when they talk about non-reductive physicalism. But non-reductive physicalism is actually property dualism.
No, because they're saying not at all. Well, actually, yeah, in a sense. Okay, so you tell me, because maybe there's a formulation of it that isn't property dualism. What I understand non-reductive physicalism, at least the Jessica Wilson's kind of follow up on Kim, is that you have the qualia or the emergent, let's say whatever, ontological property, power, it has causal efficacy. It is independent, sort of ontologically. Well, it's dependent, but it's distinct ontologically from the parts that make it up. However, it is also physical, right? So the neurons are physical, but the conscious state is physical too.
But the conscious state is just like
It's not
something
reducible.
that we don't have that we can't.
It's not reducible, yeah.
Right.
So it's
like
ontologically
saying, like, for example, this, like, if the Cartesian soul was literally a physical little airy ghost, like Lemon
Exactly.
Snail's avatar, then yeah, that's an interesting. Maybe I had considered that, but does that? Oh, the question is that the same as property dualism?
I don't know, but it does
or
run into it does run into overdetermination. That's the problem.
No, I don't give a fuck about overdetermination. I think.
But she says it's not of the firing squad variety, and I never figure out what the fuck that means. Like, that's the only part of that paper.
Squad,
No, I know what she means by it. I know what she means by it, that it's not of the firing squad variety. I don't know how she proves that it's not of the firing squad variety, because I think it is.
Right. Wait, where's the paper? Did
It's
you know
called-
that just... Huh? What's it called?
It's called Metaphysical Emergence, Weak and Strong. I'll send it to you.
Oh, that paper.
Oh, you read it?
No, I just downloaded it.
But she actually wrote a whole book this year called Metaphysical Emergence, which is, I think, fleshes out the whole paper, I think.
I was at a conference on emergence in 2019. There was some interesting stuff of that, but it was about space-time emergence. But there was still some, like, it was about emergence as like methodological concepts. So, like, some people were, like, you know, talking about emergence, like the conclusions that you come to about emergence in space-time could be, you know, applied to emergence.
Dude, yeah, this professor of mathematics that I associate, he's really big on digital physics and space-time emergence, and
Interesting. Wait, do you study at the moment, Kara? I forget. Do you study?
I'm not studying right now. I'm just casually trying to learn category theory. But I want to go back into. I did computer science, but I want to go back. I want to do. No. I either do cognitive science or. But cognitive science is too wishy-washy, so I might just do AI.
Just do philosophy. At this point, you're already there. Just fucking do philosophy.
But like data science would get me paid so much.
Oh, yeah, true. What's your living situation like?
I'm doing okay. I'm in the Caribbean, but if I go back to Europe and I study data science, I would be able to afford a philosophy degree.
Yeah, true.
But no, the only thing keeping me from going into the humanities is I have not. No, I have not done enough reading. I don't feel like I will ever catch up.
That's not true. There's plenty of people who do humanities that know. Like, most people that do philosophy just, like, read one philosopher and, like, simp over that, and then they do their thing on that. Like, that's just how it is. Like, you're not gonna find... Well, okay, that's not exactly true. There's a lot of fucking, like, hustlers in America. Like, there's a lot of... There's not as many in Australia, but I think it's because, you know, grad school culture in America is, like... in Australia, you just do a master's thesis, and that's it, or PhD. In, America, you actually do courses and stuff like alongside that. So that means like everyone in philosophy departments in America is like has an opinion on everything. And then when you come to an Australian conference and you ask them, they're just like, I don't know about that.
Dude, have you talked to Batavian? He's on. He has a really wide range of interests.
Is that Smart? Who is that? Is that Armstrong or Smart or someone? Snail?
Oh.
Smart. I think, was he the guy whose brain is kept at Adelaide University? I know when I went to Adelaide University, there's some brain that's kept in a jar, and all my friends went to see it at the conference. They like went to see Smart's brain in a jar and posed with it. Yeah, he kept his brain in a vat. I think it's him. Yeah.
So funny.
Because Chalmers went with my friend to see it.
Dude, he sent me Batavian, this guy in Decaf, Decaf? No, in
Yeah,
Cafe. He sent me. He was here too, but I think he's still around. But he's writing his thesis on co-algebraic spaces, and he sent me. He has so much interest, like in philosophy of science and so many topics, like in metaphysics and epistemology and philosophy of math and logic. He sent me a paper called "The Autodidactic Universe," and it's about how it's still in peer review, but it's about how the universe learns its rules by testing them, and then defines its own laws by sort of committing to them, like a fucking.
It seems like it'd be committed to some sort of panpsychism.
I don't know. I'm not so sure, but I actually don't know what to make of it. But just the idea. I mean, this is so typical. We make up a technology like AI, and then we're like, the universe must be a machine.
Let's apply it to everything. Like,
yeah. And so
a computer would be something entirely unique. A computer would be something entirely unique. AI itself there's never been anything like AI. Nothing that was created by the previous species. Designed.
This is what this paper is saying. The autodidactic universe. It's saying that the universe basically self-learned its own rules, its own limitations. And
but I guess if it's not conscious, then that's interesting, because it's talking about the like the empirical stuff to do with it, not the consciousness stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
well,
if it can be
Wolfram has that. Wolfram has that. Wolfram also has space-time emergence, but from what he calls causal graphs. And the universe doesn't have to be conscious to do that. I don't know if it has to be conscious for the auto universe.
Yeah, it just means that the equations of a causal explanation is similar as self-learning, maybe.
Yeah, that was a wild paper.
I was just gonna say, Jessica Wilson sent me an email like, "Yo, I really like your meme. Can I have it in high quality?"
No way! Yo, that's so cool.
Yeah. So.
Wait, put it where? Put it on her door?
Yeah, on her office wall or door.
Oh, which meme? Hey, yo, share it. You have to share it.
Yeah. I'll try and find it.
That's so cool, dude.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that's fucking epic.
And do you know Francesco Berto as well? Do you know Francesco Berto? Okay, he's a guy that does a lot of impossibility logic stuff.
Oh.
I'll send you his. Are you at all interested in the modal imagination literature or the modal stuff?
I want to get into it. I want to get into modal logic. Okay. Really, that's the main reason pulling me towards analytic metaphysics, honestly.
Modality, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, too bad. I think all modality is full
of shit.
Say that. Well, it's because I have a deflational theory. Oh yeah. I said
full of
shit.
Okay.
But it's interesting because I of course now have a deflational view about modality, in which I think, but see, even coming to that view takes engaging with the modal literature, and I still think that some form of modal combinatorialism is at least kind of interesting. This idea that if you rearrange objects in the actual world, that's how you get possibility. And that this, connects to TVs in an interesting way.
But don't you know
AI
that
has nothing to do with TV.
Concrete, Ugu.
No, I'm not Lewisian. Wait, Hera, I have a meme about this.
I want to know the meme that Jessica asked you for.
Okay, I'm scrolling. I'm scrolling for it. Check out this meme.
These guys think about possibly. Oh, that's so good. Oh my god.
I have this other meme, but it's a bit hard to read, but you'll probably like it.
I want to know the one Wilson got.
This meme was a stinker. Yeah, I'm scrolling for it.
Actuality, isn't it? You small brain baby. Deep modal truth reveals. Big brain. The entirety of reality anyway. Oh my god, no. No, the whole modal realist gang is no, stay away. Wait, reality from monkey brain tuition. This is almost cringe. Unless
this
it's
meme made by Modal Realist Gang. It's ironic.
This is such Zoomer, like, oh my god. Like, these are Zoomer memes. Zoomer philosophy memes. That's so funny.
This is why I made. Oh, wait. This. This one is very.
Dude, you should be spamming these in philosophy memes. Wait,
should I? Oh, yeah.
A priori truth is based on primary intention. No! Two-dimensional models.
Do you understand this one? Do you get this one?
Is this, this is not about Lewis, is it?
No, this is about two-dimensional semantics.
Okay, but two-dimensional semantics is exactly separating primary and secondary intentions, right? Like, you get that by pulling them apart, right?
What do you mean by pulling them apart? Because like every term,
like intentions.
Every term in E2D had as a primary and secondary.
Yeah, so like you don't like intention is two types, right? Yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah. They're two different functions.
Yes, but I don't know why water. Like, would that be like the water is H2O? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's the water is H2O example.
Oh man, that's.
But the meme you're missing is that they call the there's something called the diagonal in the like table that you can construct to analyze a primary.
Yeah, which is the
and secondary
identity,
intention.
right?
Yeah, which is the identity. So that's like the diagonal line of the scissors cutting the water.
Oh,
the
that's
identity of the
reach. Okay, that's funny.
Yeah,
a bit of a reach,
no,
but that's funny.
No, there's other memes I had where it's like there was this E2D conference in like 2004, and like when they took a photo together, everyone did a hand symbol that showed the diagonal line, like as some kind of gang symbol or something.
Oh man, that's so funny.
It's pretty funny.
Okay.
And I'm still scrolling for the meme. Sorry about that. Oh wait. Okay, I'm finding my memes along. Sorry guys, I just turned this into a meme chat now. Self-masturbatory. This is one of my greatest theories.
Object-oriented ontology. What the fuck?
This is the horseshoe theory of philosophy. Which is that if you get so analytic and so continental, they start to merge, and it's the same thing.
Intervene and Carnap becomes a Husserlian, but Heidegger becomes Lewisian before. Oh, no. Oh, what have you done?
Yeah, it's kind of nonsense, but
yeah, memes.
Dude, I read this paper called Why Be Human? Maudlin? You know Maudlin?
Yeah, I do know Maudlin.
Where he basically teases out these two. Basically, separability and statism, which he thinks are going to be necessary for like Lewisian humanism and humanism. And he just asked the question like, why do you know?
Sorry, you're cutting off a bit.
Yeah, sorry. Wait, I'm trying to finish reading this fucking meme. Heideggerian phenomenology. I don't know what the fuck hyperintentional grounding is. I know what most of these are.
But like this is pure shitpost. There's very little truth. Like some of the things like
positivist. Huh? Okay, this is a high effort shitpost though.
Yeah, it is.
Not complete, but what is hyperintentional grounding?
But grounding is just a metaphysically necessary partial structured order hyperintentional relation. But what that means is that strict partial order is like strict partial order would be like irreflexive, asymmetric, transitive. It's metaphysically necessary, but it's hyperintentional, which means the truth value between two necessities differs at impossible worlds. So it's postmodal.
Okay, this is way above my pay grade, but that's Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah. No,
necessary,
it's confusing.
Asymmetric, but only true because of impossible worlds.
Yeah. Well, the definition of it is impossible. Like, so think about how extensionality is a function from like the term to the actual world. Intentionality asks about possible worlds. So hyperintentionality is just one layer above that. It asks, this other set of worlds, the impossible worlds.
Do you take physical
other
causal
words-
closure to be true?
Wait. Stop for a second. I just want to explain this a bit more to you. What
Very good.
hyperintentional is.
Yes.
Let's go for an example, right? You have two extensional claim. An extensional claim, and you can imagine that the extensional claim is true or the extensional claim is false. How do you differ between the extensional claim being true or false?
No.
Right, it's by possible worlds, right? We say like, I'm sitting on my chair, true at possible world 1, false at possible world 2, right?
It's predictive, right?
So, pardon?
We predict what world we will exist in.
Well, we're not
No,
talking about
You're
You're
right.
saying like the world where it's true, the world where it's true is counterfactual to the world where it isn't.
Yeah, we're
I
not
feel like
actually
instead of
talking
saying that
about
we-
reasoning humans employ it, because humans don't employ this reasoning. Only fucking like philosophy grad students employ this reasoning.
Right,
So,
exactly. Most people struggle to create the world in the first place, let alone think about the multiple realities you can live in. Most people stick to
Yeah,
that first one and remain there forever.
Okay, finish explaining the fucking shitpost.
Yeah. So, so then we can do the same thing with an intentional term. So we take an intentional term, or two intentional terms like God exists is necessary, and 2 + 2 = 4 is necessary. So how are you going to tell them apart? You can't tell them apart by their intentions, because their intention is going to deliver you exactly the same set of possible worlds. So you have to go to an impossible world to distinguish them. Right? Because think of... Yeah.
And then like they have to both be true because there is no world where one is true and the other isn't.
Yeah. Oh,
But
TGW is here. It's time to stop talking about...
oh no, TG Dub.
Yeah, what's up?
We're actually deflationary pilled. We're just explaining the meme, or he is. I did not commit metaphysics today.
Hey, TGW, what do you think of stoned ape theory? We're discussing stoned ape theory. Guy like...
That's the theory where our ancestors ate a mushroom and got smart.
Yep.
Well,
Yes.
he was claiming that the origin of consciousness is eating mushroom.
Just that it's a factor for human development. It's potentially... you can't write it off as potentially being a factor in human development.
I mean, his opinion was a bit stronger than that. It was that it's how...
Yeah, I
Came
feel
to
like we
be.
ended up at a place that I just said that we're not saying that it's definitely it happened, but we're saying that it would be funny if it's true, and it possibly is true.
I hope it's true.
Yeah, exactly, man. Me too.
Oh man. No, honestly, if psychedelics do promote neurogenesis, I think that's compelling evidence. Not conclusive though.
Yeah.
I find if someone brings up stoned ape theory, that means they watch Joe Rogan.
I don't know who
Yeah,
brought it up,
probably.
but it wasn't me.
It was the guy Drauke, something like that. Wasn't
Oh,
it?
the guy that left when I was trying to explain functionism and preferred his definition of a priori or something.
Yes. Yeah,
Well,
exactly. He looked up a priori and thought you were explaining
The
it.
positive
but
effect of
priori
Joe Rogan
was-
is... Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry.
Oh, I was just saying that Joe Rogan, even though it's kind of ironic that you're absolutely right about that, it's kind of nice to have someone who's, I don't know, I would say clearly masculine in some weird, like, fuzzy kind of sense. And a lot of men gravitate towards this thing that is very clearly masculine. I just think that's hilarious.
I like Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, he helped me lose weight and shit.
Yeah, dude, hell yeah,
Very
man.
motivational.
Hell yeah. He shows you who David Goggins is.
Dude, Dude, David Goggins is
Yeah.
the man.
Yeah, and
Oh
that's
my
part of
God.
That's part of the human condition too. Is really like pushing your body to the limit. Wasn't that like a fucking fuck God
Wait,
damn it.
Hera, do you want to go in serious or casual or
Yeah.
whatever?
Yeah.
Continue. Okay.
Yes.
They got their other stuff to talk about. Yeah, good for you, man.
Oh,
I lost
I lost
60 kilo.
Nice, dude, fantastic. And that was basically kicked off because of Joe Rogan.
Say again?
That was kicked off because of Joe Rogan. Like he like gave you the motivation.
Oh,
to...
yeah. Joe Rogan 100% was the original guide to my weight loss.
Yeah, it's really interesting that that's true. That like Joe Rogan just kind of operates as kind of like an ideal that mostly men have. You know, being like a guy that works out, a guy that can take care of themselves. I don't know.
He's, you know, I work in the security industry, so there's a lot of downtime, so I can just sit there and listen to Joe Rogan all the time. I've watched him grow over the years. I mean, he's obviously a bit of a fool, but at least he admits he's a fool, you know?
Hell yeah, man. We all should.
But the motivational aspect of him is unquestionable, though. I mean, just... I don't know how to explain it. Just, it's there. It's very good.
No, exactly. And I think that it's probably the most charismatic people are not just the people that are really good at speaking, but the ones that really live a lifestyle that's consistent with their the morality that they would say they would do. So like Joe Rogan doesn't just talk about when he says this is how I live my life, it's really impactful because it's like this guy was successful at achieving his goals. So it like naturally makes him interesting to listen to, because he is honestly probably the most genuine person I've ever seen, the
100%.
most genuine celebrity that I've ever seen.
I can't stand when people say that he's a shill, or
Right.
say that he's like
I
holding
get
some party line. He's
Right.
clearly like this open fucking wound for
Right.
the whole world to see.
he has opinions and he has wrong opinions, but he's not, you know, he's honest about it. At the end of the day, he's just
Yeah.
a stoner that got super famous.
I really like to hear that from someone else, because I'm usually out here fucking defending him, even though I know he's a fucking idiot.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I'm still defending him.
exactly. The only reason that I would defend him for someone who is an idiot is if they're self-aware, and then absolutely, hell yeah, as long as you're self-aware that you have limitations, then I feel like you're good in my book.
That's wisdom. That's
Yeah.
wisdom.
Hell yeah, man. It's
But
late.
David Goggins, though.
Oh
holy
man,
shit.
I have not entered into
Every
that realm.
Fucking morning, 4:00 a.m. He's got the watch out. My God.
Yeah. It's late.
And
I gotta get going, but it was really nice talking with you, and everybody else.
Say cheese.
Later.